Resignation, a story of power, love, and choosing yourself. Part 1. The corner office. The first thing you notice about Marcus Chen is that he is, undeniably and gravity-alteringly, the most powerful person in the room. It is not because of what he says. In fact, he barely talks in meetings. He prefers to sit at the head of the long mahogany table, his hands steeped together, absorbing the frantic energy of the executives around him like a sponge. It is because everyone watches him. The entire ecosystem of Stratton Digital revolves around the microscopic shifts in his expression. Everyone waits for the subtle crinkle at the corner of his eyes before they dare to laugh at a vendor's joke. Everyone watches the tightening of his jaw when multi-million-dollar decisions are being debated. The room breathes only when Marcus exhales. Marcus is 47, the CEO and primary architect of Stratton Digital, currently hailed as one of the fastest-growing tech conglomerates on the West Coast. He built this company from a dingy, windowless garage operation into a towering glass and steel monolith that dominates the Seattle skyline. He has made split-second decisions that cost millions and generated billions. He has fired incompetent board members without a single tremor of hesitation. He is the kind of ruthless, visionary leader that prestigious business schools write exhaustive, semester-long case studies about. I am David Morrison. I am 34, and I have worked in the shadow of Marcus Chen for 6 grueling, transformative years. I started as a junior analyst, functioning on 4 hours of sleep and in for drip of terrible break-room coffee. I was a nameless cog in a machine that didn't care if I lived or died, so long as my quarterly projections were accurate. But through an exhausting cocktail of hard work, aggressively smart decisions, and crucially because Marcus saw something in me that others didn't, I climbed. I became his protege, his sounding board, and eventually his VP of operations. I am now the second most powerful person in the company. The first thing you notice about Marcus is that he is powerful. But the second thing you notice, if you are quiet enough and paying close enough attention, is that he is deeply, fundamentally lonely. We have had 1,000 business dinners, 1,000 late nights poring over acquisition contracts in hotel lobbies from Tokyo to London. We have shared 1,000 solitary moments where the deafening noise of the corporate world faded, his professional mask slipped, and I finally saw the man underneath. I saw the man who silently doubts his own legacy, who carries the crushing weight of 5,000 employees' livelihoods on his shoulders, who stands by the floor-to-ceiling windows of his corner office, looking down at the glittering city lights, and seems to be silently calculating the exact distance of his fall. Somewhere in the quiet spaces between those 1,000 moments between reviewing financial disclosures at 2 a.m. and sharing a weary, knowing glance across a hostile boardroom, I fell completely and hopelessly in love with him. Part 2. The architecture of denial. The defining characteristic of working in a high-stakes corporate environment is that absolutely everyone is pretending. The performance is mandatory. The chief financial officer pretends to love his soul-crushing job. The board members pretend to care about sustainable growth and employee wellness, rather than just their quarterly stock dividends. The HR department pretends that their primary function is protecting the workers, not the company. And I pretend that I am not desperately in love with my boss. Honestly, it isn't even that difficult. Corporate culture is entirely built on a foundation of mutual denial. We deny that we work 60 to 80-hour weeks and call it hustle. We deny that we are chronically exhausted, masking our burnout with cold plunges and productivity hacks. We deny that our blind ambition is slowly hollowing us out, destroying our personal lives, and leaving us empty. Adding just one more layer of denial to the pile, the lie that my pulse doesn't race. When Marcus calls my name feels almost terrifyingly normal, but the truth is always there, vibrating beneath the surface. It is there in the meticulous way I arrange my daily schedule to ensure it perfectly overlaps with his. It is there in how I remember his highly specific coffee order, black, dark roast, to precisely measure drops of vanilla without ever having to write it down. It is there in how I instinctively find myself defending his most controversial decisions in hostile strategy meetings, acting as a shield even when, privately, I might disagree with him. Marcus is married to Catherine. They have been married for 18 years. They have 2 teenage kids who attend elite boarding schools on the East Coast. From what the public and the paparazzi can see, they are perfectly fine. Which is to say, they exist in the same sprawling architectural marvel of a house and occasionally appear together at company galas, smiling with the practiced perfection of 2 people who are honoring a very expensive PR contract. There is no warmth in their shared glances. It is a partnership of image, a merger of 2 powerful families, not a romance. I am not the kind of person who fucks married men. I am not the kind of person who ruins families or orchestrates affairs in cheap hotel rooms. I am the kind of person who goes home to my empty, minimalist apartment, pours a glass of expensive scotch, jerks off thinking about the way Marcus rolls up his sleeves when he's stressed, and then feels a suffocating wave of shame for an entire week. But something fundamental shifts in the universe the week I turn 34. I wake up, stare at the ceiling, and realize that I have been waiting. Waiting for what? For Marcus to suddenly blow up his 18-year marriage. For him to magically discover he is harboring secret feelings for his VP of Operations. For the universe to suddenly pause its rotation and allow what we both implicitly know is vibrating in the air between us. It is a fool's errand. I am wasting my youth sitting in the passenger seat of someone else's life. I decide to transfer. I am too fiercely ambitious. To leave Stratton Digital entirely, I have poured my blood into this place. But I can move to a different division. The newly acquired European tech division needs a steady hand. It is an ocean away. Somewhere Marcus isn't my direct supervisor. Somewhere I can finally get some air. I tell Marcus on a rainy Thursday afternoon. He is in his corner office. The gray storm clouds of Seattle sprawling behind him, casting long, melancholic shadows across his desk. He is reading a heavily redacted legal document on his monitor. When I tell him I am stepping down as his VP to head the European division, he doesn't even look up at first. His pen just stops moving. Why? He asks. His voice is dangerously quiet. I want to expand my operational experience, I recite, having practiced this corporate lie in the mirror a dozen times. I think I'm ready to take on P and L responsibilities for a standalone division. New challenges. He finally slowly raises his head and looks at me. His eyes are the exact same piercing, intelligent brown they were 6 years ago when I first walked into this building. But they look different now. They look exhausted, defeated, like he has been waiting to, and realizes the clock just ran out. That's not the real reason, he says softly. It is, David. He says my name like pulling the syllables from his throat physically hurts him. Like saying it out loud in this glass cage is admitting to a federal crime. Don't do this. Don't do what? I challenge, my heart hammering against my ribs. Don't leave because of me. I stand there, rooted to the thick carpet in his corner office, with the sprawling, weeping city behind him and the crushing, undeniable weight of 6 years of unspoken yearning thick in the air between us. I have to, I say, and I walk out before he can see me break. Part 3. The distance. The transfer doesn't work. If anything, it makes the agony sharper. I am now running the European division. I spend my days in London and Paris, managing a massive portfolio. And I barely see Marcus except on pixelated quarterly video calls, where he sits at the head of a table 3,000 miles away. This should be the perfect remedy. This should mean I can finally detox, stop feeling this way, and move on with my life. Instead, it is infinitely worse. The physical absence of him leaves a gaping void that makes every mundane task feel impossible. I work late into the London night, and I think about him. I go out to bars in Soho with well-meaning friends, and I think about him. I try to date handsome, successful, available men, and I ruthlessly compare every single one of them to a ghost. None of them have his intellect. None of them have his quiet laugh. 6 months into my transfer, the news breaks. Catherine and Marcus announce their separation. It hits the news cycle hard. Not just the mainstream business news, but the ravenous tech industry blogs and gossip columns. The brilliant, stoic CEO of Stratton Digital is separating. There is endless, breathless speculation about what this means for the company's stock price. There are crude jokes about midlife crises and rumors of secret mistresses. I sit in my London office, staring at the headline on my monitor, and I feel entirely numb. I don't reach out to him. I know what the news means, and simultaneously, I have absolutely no idea what it means. Because Marcus and I have never spoken a single honest word about his marriage or our reality. I force myself to stay away. I will not be the catalyst, and I refuse to be the rebound. The divorce proceedings are brutal, corporate, and agonizingly slow. It takes a full 12 months of legal maneuvering, asset division, and board reassurances before the papers are signed. A year and a half after I left for Europe, a month after the divorce is officially finalized, my phone rings. It's him. I want you back in Seattle, Marcus says. No greeting, no small talk. As my VP of Operations, I want you back on my floor. Okay, I say, my voice embarrassingly breathless. I fly back. The morning I walk into his office, the Seattle sun is actually shining. Marcus looks thinner, older, but there is a strange, new clarity in his posture. Is there a professional reason you wouldn't want to come back to this role? He asks, leaning against the edge of his desk. No. Then tell me why you really left, David. I could lie again. I should lie. The corporate walls have ears. But I am 35 years old now, and I am so unbelievably tired of lying. Because I couldn't be near you for another second without wanting something I knew I couldn't have. It was killing me. Marcus slowly stands up straight. He walks to the massive window. The city is spread below us, buzzing with millions of lives sprawling out like a grand, complex promise my wife knew, he says, his voice barely above a whisper. Catherine. She knew for years. Marcus. She knew that ours wasn't a real marriage. But more than that, she knew that I was in love with someone else. I never touched you. I never crossed a line. But she saw the way I looked at you at the galas. She saw the way I talked about your projects. A year and a half ago, she sat me down and gave me an ultimatum. She told me I could either leave and finally be honest about who I am, or stay and be a miserable lie until we died. She said she wouldn't be collateral damage in my closet anymore. He turns to face me. The formidable CEO mask is entirely gone. There is only Marcus. I choose to be honest, he says, his eyes locked onto mine. David, I have been desperately in love with you for 6 years. I let you walk away to London because I was a coward. But I am not your boss anymore if you don't want me to be. We can go to HR, we can figure out the logistics. But I need you to know right now that this is real. This has been real the entire time. Part 4, the secret. We tried to keep it a secret. We really, truly did. We understood the catastrophic implications of our dynamic. So, we maintained a flawless, almost robotic professional distance in the office. We never rode the same elevator. We never lingered after meetings. We never touched, not even a brush of shoulders in the hallway. We gave the board, the executives, and the gossip-hungry assistants absolutely zero reason to suspect anything. Marcus became my CEO from 8 a.m. to 6 p.m., and my boyfriend behind closed doors to completely contradictory roles. That should have been impossible to reconcile, but that he seemed to manage with his characteristic ironclad control for 6 glorious months. It was perfect. We would take separate cars and meet at his secluded house in the hills. We would cook dinner together, drinking wine and arguing about movies. We would exist simply as David and Marcus instead of the VP and the Titan of tech. It was everything I had ever agonizingly imagined. And yet nothing like what I'd imagined, because the warm, tangible reality of being loved by Marcus Chen was so much richer, so much more beautifully complicated than my lonely fantasies. But secrets in a corporate ecosystem are like water. They eventually find a crack. They don't just survive in a vacuum. They mutate. They become whispers. They become leverage. It started with an offhand comment from Richard, our aggressively ambitious chief financial officer, during a board meeting. A seemingly innocent, smiling joke about how my strategic proposals always seemed to have Marcus's special blessing. Then came the subtle shift in office politics, people stopping their conversations when I walked into the break room. The whisper campaign grew legs. Then came the strike. A formal complaint was filed to HR. It was from an anonymous high-level employee, almost certainly Richard, claiming that I was actively using an undisclosed, intimate relationship with the CEO to unfairly advance my career, secure budget approvals, and monopolize power. The company's external legal counsel was notified. Stratton Digital officially launched a formal ethics investigation. Part 5, The Reckoning. The HR investigation was humiliating. I sat in a sterile, white-walled conference room for 3 days, fielding thinly veiled interrogations from the head of HR and an external auditor. They asked about my travel logs, my hotel receipts, the timestamps on my promotions. They were hunting for a reason to terminate me to protect Marcus. But Marcus refused to let me be the scapegoat. On a Tuesday morning, Marcus bypassed HR, bypassed the frantic PR team, and unilaterally called an all-hands meeting. The entire company was summoned. 400 employees physically packed into the main auditorium, with thousands more dialing in via live stream from global offices. People were murmuring, holding notebooks, waiting to hear about a surprise quarterly earnings drop, a massive new product launch, or a devastating round of layoffs. Instead, Marcus stepped up to the podium. He adjusted the microphone. He looked out over the sea of faces, found me standing in the back row near the exit signs, and took a deep breath. I have called you all here today to directly address the rumors that have been circulating about my personal life and the integrity of our executive team. Marcus's voice echoed through the cavernous room. Steady, then unflinching. My stomach dropped into the floor. The room went dead silent. For the last 6 months, I have been in a committed relationship with David Morrison, our VP of Operations. This relationship is entirely real. It is consensual, and it is based on profound mutual respect and love. He paused, letting the shockwave ripple through the 400 people sitting in front of him. I saw Richard, the CFO, pale in the front row. I became the CEO of this company because I believed in building a meritocracy. An organization where absolute excellence was rewarded, and where integrity was non-negotiable. I have spent the last 6 months fundamentally violating both of those core principles, by actively hiding who I am, by pretending that my personal life isn't relevant to my leadership, by suggesting, through my cowardly silence, that there is something inherently shameful or scandalous about a man loving another man. Someone in the middle of the audience audibly gasped. A few people pulled out their phones, frantically texting. David Morrison was promoted to VP because he is exceptional at his job, Marcus continued, his voice rising, commanding the space. He has been the smartest person in the room since he walked through our doors 6 years ago. The fact that his professional excellence happens to be accompanied by the fact that I love him does not and will not change the validity of his accomplishments, and anyone suggesting that it does is relying on an archaic, bigoted assumption that queer relationships are inherently less professional or less valid than straight ones. He looked directly over the crowd, his eyes finding mine again. The armor was gone. He was entirely exposed. I am standing here today as the CEO of Stratton Digital, but more importantly, as a gay man who has been deeply afraid for the last 6 months. Afraid that acknowledging my truth would somehow diminish my authority in your eyes. Afraid that the board and the market would discount my leadership because of who I love. Afraid that I had spent decades building a company that didn't actually have the capacity to accept the real me. He placed his hands on the edges of the podium, his knuckles white. I am here to tell you that I was wrong to hide. I am entirely done being afraid, and I am done compromising my humanity for quarterly optics. If this company, or its board, cannot accept that its founder and CEO is a gay man in love with his partner, then this company does not deserve to have me. He held the silence in the room for 5 agonizing, powerful seconds. Let them feel the weight of it. Then he stepped away from the podium, turned his back on the crowd, and walked off the stage. Part 6: The Aftermath. The board of directors convened an emergency session that lasted for chaotic, screaming hours. They discussed legal liability. They discussed the immediate PR strategy to mitigate the fallout. They looked at real-time social media metrics and discussed whether Marcus's unprecedented revelation would trigger a massive sell-off from their conservative institutional investors. What they emphatically did not discuss was asking him to resign, because legally and publicly firing a wildly successful, visionary CEO simply because he came out of the closet would have been an apocalyptic PR nightmare, a massive lawsuit waiting to happen, and the end of Stratton Digital's reputation in the progressive tech sector. They wanted him to stay. They just wanted him to sign a mountain of behavioral clauses and quietly move me out of the company, with a massive severance package to make the conflict of interest disappear. But Marcus, as always, had already made the decision for them. He called me into his office that evening. The building was empty, echoing with the ghost of the morning's revelation. This was the same corner office where he had admitted he was in love with me. The same office where he had been suffocating in his closet for years. He was packing a cardboard box. "I'm stepping down," he said quietly, placing a framed photograph of us into the box. "What? No. Marcus, you won." I stepped forward, panicked. "The board isn't firing you. You survived, David. I can't lead a company where I have to constantly negotiate my authenticity," he said, turning to me. I sat in that boardroom for 4 hours listening to them try to figure out how to manage my sexuality as if it were a toxic asset. I can't be the visionary CEO and the heavily managed, liability risk gay man at the same time. I have to choose, so choose to stay. I argued, my voice cracking. Choose to be the openly gay CEO of a Fortune 500 company. Force them to change. Choose to be the pioneer in this industry. "I'm tired," he said simply. And in the dim light of the city, he truly looked it. He looked like a man who had been running on fumes and adrenaline for 20 years. "I'm so tired of fighting wars in boardrooms. And you know what? I don't need this job anymore. I have enough money for 10 lifetimes. I have absolute security. What I don't have, and what I want, is a life where I am not constantly performing for an audience." He walked over and stood in front of me, his hands finding my shoulders. "Come with me," he said. "What? Quit? Tomorrow morning. Come with me. We will take our capital, and we will start something entirely new. Something where we don't ever have to pretend. Where we write our own rules. Marcus, you're the CEO. You can't just walk away from the empire you built. I already handed the board my resignation letter. It's done," he said, a genuine, unburdened smile breaking across his face for the first time in weeks. "They are announcing my departure to the press tomorrow morning. By tomorrow evening, I will be unemployed. Just another guy in Seattle. And you can stay here, let Richard the CFO dictate your future, and climb a broken corporate ladder. Or you can come with me. And we can build something together that actually matters. He extended his hand. Asterisk Part 7, the decision. I handed in my resignation at 8 a.m. the next day. It shocked everyone, though it shouldn't have. The board was already reeling, in full panic mode over Marcus's sudden exit. My resignation on top of his seemed to confirm to the cynical gossips what they had suspected, that my position was entirely reliant on Marcus, and without his protection, I was fleeing. But I didn't care about their narrative. I quit because Marcus was absolutely right. I had spent 6 of the best years of my life frantically climbing a shiny corporate ladder, only to realize it was leaning against the wrong damn building. Given the choice between continuing to climb in a toxic cage, or choosing freedom and the man I loved, I chose my life. The financial press had an absolute field day. CEO and VP exit Stratton Digital amid scandal, screamed one blog. Tech giant hemorrhages top talent after bizarre all-hands meeting, wrote another. Is Stratton Digital stock in shambles following leadership exodus? Speculated the Wall Street Journal, but as the media circus raged outside, Marcus and I were sitting in a quiet, sunlit coffee shop in Oakland, armed with lattes and a stack of napkins, fiercely drafting a business plan. Marcus was alive with an energy I hadn't seen in years. We weren't retiring. We were building a venture capital firm, a firm strictly dedicated to funding and incubating LGBTQ-founded startups. A sanctuary in the cutthroat tech world where being queer wasn't a liability. You had to hide in a corner office. It was the very foundation of the community you built. We called it Prism Ventures. We are going to find and invest in the next generation of queer entrepreneurs, Marcus said, his eyes practically glowing as he sketched out a financial structure. The kids who are being ignored by the traditional, straight-laced venture capitalist on Sand Hill Road. We're going to make sure that no one ever has to choose between scaling their career and honoring their authenticity ever again. Asterisk Part 8. Epilogue. 1 year after we walked out of Stratton Digital, on the exact anniversary of our dual resignations, Marcus took me to dinner. It wasn't a Michelin-starred restaurant with white tablecloths and whispering waiters. It was the same casual, loud, wonderfully chaotic little place in Oakland where we had gone on our very first real date. After the secret was out, it was the kind of place where nobody cared about your net worth, your title, or who was holding your hand under the table. Asterisk over plates of spicy noodles. Marcus reached across the table and took my hand. I want to thank you, he said, his thumb tracing my knuckles. For what? I laughed. For navigating our Series A funding without killing each other? For leaving with me, he said, his tone turning fiercely earnest. For choosing us over the safety of the company. For blindly believing that we could build something better from scratch. You really could have stayed, I reminded him softly. You could have been the iconic, openly gay CEO of a massive conglomerate. You could have changed Stratton from the inside out. Maybe, he conceded, looking out the window at the streetlights. But I couldn't have done it with you by my side. And the truth is, I didn't want to be the openly gay CEO of a company whose culture was fundamentally broken. I wanted to be your partner. I wanted to build an empire that was authentically, undeniably ours. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He didn't drop to one knee. He didn't need to perform for the crowded room. He just opened it, revealing a sleek, understated gold band. Marry me, Marcus said, his brown eyes shining. Not because I'm powerful, not because I used to be a CEO, just because I love you. And I want to spend the absolute rest of my life building beautiful things with you. Through tears I didn't know I was holding back. I said yes. 2 years later, Prism Ventures had exploded into a powerhouse. We had successfully invested in 30 distinct startups. 15 of those were founded by brilliant queer entrepreneurs who told us point blank that they had never been taken seriously by traditional VC firms. Dismissed as niche or unrelatable, 15 thriving companies that might never have existed, creating thousands of jobs. If Marcus had stayed suffocating in his corner office, and I had stayed miserable in the European division, meanwhile, 3 years after our departure, Stratton Digital's reality finally caught up with its optics. They had immediately replaced Marcus and me with a conservative, safe new leadership team. They issued performative press statements about their unwavering commitment to diversity. They sponsored pride floats and changed their corporate logo to a rainbow every June. They did all the superficial things that terrified corporations do when they realize they've bled valuable talent due to their own bigotry. But the new executives never understood the soul of the company the way Marcus had. They lacked his vision, and they lacked the loyalty of the engineers. Within 2 years, their innovation stagnated, and their stock price plummeted. Within 3 years, the mighty Stratton Digital was unceremoniously acquired and absorbed by a much larger, faceless conglomerate. its original name wiped from the Seattle skyline. We would be lying if we said we didn't open a very expensive bottle of champagne in our living room the night that acquisition made the news. Epilogue. Our wedding was intentionally, fiercely small, just 50 people. A handful of loyal engineers and assistants from the old Stratton Digital days who had supported us. A dozen brilliant founders from our new venture capital portfolio. All of them were people who fundamentally understood that love and ambition do not have to be locked in a deathmatch. That you can have both, but only if you are brave enough to quit the systems that demand you choose. Marcus's vows were not scripted by a PR team. He talked about the agonizing cost of pretending. About how walking out of the most powerful corner office in the city was the easiest and best business decision he ever executed. About how the love of one person who truly sees you is infinitely more valuable than any board seat, any executive title, or any amount of stock options. My vows were about taking the leap, about what it meant to finally stop waiting for the world to change, and to choose someone over everything else. To leave the comforting illusion of security for the terrifying reality of uncertainty. To trust that building a life with a partner from the ground up was vastly superior to climbing a golden ladder entirely alone. At the reception, under a canopy of string lights in our backyard, we danced to an acoustic song about taking chances, about choosing love in a world obsessed with leverage, about the quiet, profound revolution of simply being exactly who you are. As Marcus spun me around, I rested my head against his chest and thought about those 6 long years, about the painful waiting, about the toxic architecture of pretending, about the crushing weight of hiding your soul in a place that aggressively demands your entire self. But looking around at the laughing, vibrant community we had gathered, I also thought about the beautiful years that came after, about creating a space where no queer kid, no brilliant engineer, no ambitious analyst would ever have to choose between their career trajectory and their core identity. That freedom was worth quitting for. That freedom was worth losing an empire for. That freedom was worth absolutely everything.